Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about possibly one of the most interesting 2-bay NASs of the year. I want to talk about the brand new Synology DS720 Plus. This is the latest iteration to join their 2-bay series of NAS. It's part of the flagship Plus series, and it's probably, of all the different devices that we've seen in the latest generation of that 20 Plus series from Synology, the one that's had the biggest change. The 220 Plus was pretty good. We already hardware reviewed that a little while ago, I think a couple of weeks ago now, and when we reviewed that we talked about its changes, to the fact that I gave it 2 LAN and removed a few bits and bobs. But this is their flagship powerhouse 2-bay. It arrived with very similar hardware to that of its predecessor in the form of the DS718 Plus, but it also arrives with NVMe SSD caching built in. That is a 2-bay with 2 bays of SSD cache as well. So 2 hard drives in SATA, 2 NVMe SSDs, which from Synology was frankly incredible. Because although they are a company that is better than they used to be in terms of hardware, it has to be said that in terms of general hardware upgrades, they've never really been pushing the envelope. They were the first company, it should be said, to introduce NVMe SSD cache, but I never thought in a month of Sundays that of all the brands out there that would introduce a simple 2-bay SATA drive, so even with enterprise level SSDs, you're probably lucky to get 700-800 megs out of it, that they would be the ones to introduce a 2-bay with caching. But I've banged on about that feature plenty. Let's talk a little bit about this device before we go through with the unboxing. First and foremost, it is a quad-core powered NAS. This 2-bay arrives with the J4125 processor. That's a very new generation Celeron, and that CPU also enables DDR4 memory. So that CPU arrives inside this with 2 gig of DDR4 memory that will be upgraded with an official expansion to 6 gig, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. It arrives with support of largely everything that Synology have got in DSM 6.2 currently, with 7 coming at the end of the year, and this device arrives with support of Synology Drive, Synology Moments, Synology Office, Synology Mail, Synology everything, Synology Surveillance Station, Synology Virtual Machine Manager, Docker and more. All of the applications from Synology run on this bad boy, and along with that, it is a 2-bay NAS that could be expanded up to a total 7 bays with the connection of the DX517, an eSATA connection, and with that, those expanded bays, the device on its own supports JBOD, just a bunch of drives. It arrives with support of RAID 1, which is a mirroring of 2 drives, where drives are read and written to simultaneously, as well as RAID 0, where it combines the drives with an enhanced amount of storage available and increased read and write speeds, but a slight negligible amount of safety there in RAID 1, but it also arrives, RAID 0, but also arrives with support of Synology Hybrid RAID, which allows you to expand your RAID over mixed drives. You can use, on day 1 you might use a couple of 4 TBs, but a few years down the line you can introduce larger drives and the RAID will work its way around and get the best output for you. Now, SHR on a 2-bay kind of has its limitations, because even if you do have mixed drives and one was a 10 TB and the other was a 4 TB, it will still treat that 10 TB, for the short term at least, as a 4 TB until you introduce another 10 TB. But where it comes into play is with that expansion. You can expand this 2-bay NAS into that total 7 bays and expand your RAID over them. So you can create an SHR on this on day 1 with a couple of 4, 6, 8, 10 TBs, whatever, and then using that expansion, add more drives and expand that RAID. And that's when SHR not only allows you to take advantage of a group of different drives that are larger in capacity down the line, but also allows you to expand the RAID easily, because an SHR with these 2 disks, once you start moving it up to a larger SHR or a RAID 5 or RAID 6, if you want to go with those, that expansion will benefit you, although SHR is going to be easier to grow across those drives and bays. Now, the device itself arrives about 400 Nika. I think it's about 425, 430 at the moment of launch. There might be a slight difference depending on where you shop around the world, and that for the UK at least does include your tax, but does not include the hard drives inside. It supports up to the very latest 16 TB drives from Seagate, and that's their Iron Wolf series of drives. And the Iron Wolf series of drives is kind of their NAS range, and the larger series, those 16 TBs, also support those their 7200 RPM inside and 256 megabytes of cache. So you are getting excellent performance, around 250 to 260 megs per drive. Now, it's not all good news, and we'll get on to the abilities later on, but for now, I've been banging on for at least 5 minutes. Let's take a look at this box. So straight away off the bat, we have got very similar boxing there as we've seen in other Synology 2-bay NAS. It's quite discreet, it's quite small, it's quite well made for transit as it goes, and on top of that, it's got that sleek kind of Synology vibe going on. So you've got like the branded handle and the kind of very clean labeling there that kind of says, oh, this is what our product, this is what it does. It won't tell you what it can't do, but it'll tell you what it can do. And that's kind of something you feel across the whole utilization of this device. I've not opened this yet. To be honest, this is the first time I'm opening it, so I'm really hoping it's inside. Otherwise, this could be a very short video. Have a look at the clock below. I'm sure it's not over yet. But overall, that's the external packaging. There is a full breakdown on NAS compares and a link in the description, where I go into a lot more detail about the retail kit on this and, of course, the hardware inside. We open this up. We have inside the NAS itself in its nice cloth bag, and it's got that Synology label. We'll come back to that in just a second. And we have our quick start installation guide there. And again, quite nice. I was getting quite used to those Japanese kind of detailed manuals that I've talked about in my other videos. But it's still a pretty good manual overall and gives you a bit of information about first time setup and directs you towards the guides for setting the device up for the first time. If we have a look at the accessories, we have a UK mains lead, and again, that's because this device has an external PSU. Talking of external PSUs, there it is, there's our external PSU, and again, branded external PSU, and I know I harped on about this on my other hardware review, the 220 Plus, but I will mention it again. I know a number of you aren't as bowled over as I am by external PSUs, but I'm telling you, it's just easier. An external power brick gives you the ability to replace this if there's a problem down the line. PSU's second most frail part of any storage device, and moreover, having an external PSU means less heat inside your NAS. So again, I know a number of you aren't overly keen on external PSUs. Me personally, I think it's the way forward. Inside also, we have two Cat5e LAN cables, because this is a dual port NAS. It is 1 GBE, which I know hacked a few of you off, but we'll touch on that later on. And we have screws for 2.5-inch drive media and keys there for the trays at the front. So let's get rid of all the bits that we're not going to need. Move that off the table and take a good look at this NAS. So, get that drive out of there. Right, let's have a good look at this NAS. And it is a slight tweaked redesign over what we've seen in the previous generation, the 718. And on the front there, it's slightly taller looking, and that's so they can incorporate those 718 bays at the bottom. Those 718 NVMe bays based into the base of the device. And if we have a look at the front there, we can see it looks a little bit sharper than its predecessor, the 718. It's got those two trays on the front. We've got those LEDs based in the top to give us real-time information about the system status and network connections. There's also LEDs just generally built into the device that will give you understanding of the drives when they're being accessed. It's very limited compared to that of an LCD, let's be honest. Synology's never really been a brand that wants to kind of really focus on real-time information in terms of right there. They want everything to be networking the internet, and you know, fair play to them, they're faithful to that. I know it's not for everyone, but it's still pretty good. They've got a USB port there on the front that isn't one-touch copy, and I know I really sing the praises of one-touch copy buttons, and I've talked about it in previous videos, but I know it's still quite niche. Me personally, I wish it had a one-touch copy button, because I think that is just a nice, simple, easy procedure for backing up data to and from very easily at the touch of a button. You know, whether it's the whole system or differential backups or other ones, and that works both ways between a USB and a NAS. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be one button touch, and it can be automatic just by introducing a drive, and you set that routine up for the first time and it'll always do it automatically. So I know the button isn't the be all end all, and it's certainly not the reason you're buying a power NAS like this one compared to the other ones in its range. So if we have a look at the trays, they are the plastic click and load trays that we've seen before. And again, these are spring-loaded and they are lockable, which some of you might quite like. Don't get me wrong, it's hardly the most secure when it comes to locking. Someone could just steal this and run away. But it does prevent people accidentally removing drives in error. And you'll be amazed how often that can happen. It's probably one of the main criticisms people have about external power bricks too. The drives themselves, installing a drive is very easy. You remove one side panel. You remove the other side panel. You get your drive, you pop it in there, flat down, make sure the SATA bay is faced out and the drive label at the top. Pop in your clips, put them in either side, and boom, there's your drive inside there, nicely held. And again, sliding the drive in is real easy, just 1, 2, 3. Done. And it's that straightforward to install a drive inside this thing. Now, bear in mind, this is a 2-bay NAS, and you can operate it with 2 drives in those different RAIDs that we talked about earlier. But what I will say is that you can get away with a single drive if you want. Obviously, you're taking a lot of risks with regards to data storage and if your drive fails. And unless you have alternative backup strategies behind this, like this is backing up another core NAS device, or you have a USB backup or a cloud backup, I wouldn't rely on one disk and among the Sundays. But let's get that drive out of there and take a good look inside this device. Let's remove that. We've got the other tray, identical. And remember, there are screw holes for 2.5-inch media as well for SSDs. And if we look inside this device, we can see a couple of things. First and foremost, try and get the light just right. We can see those SATA bays inside, those 2 6 gigabit or a potential maximum of 600 megabytes per second SATA connections. Bear in mind, you will have to make sure you have the kind of media that can take advantage of that. Generally, most commercial SATA SSDs will not go higher than about 550 meg, and traditional hard drives, you're talking 250. And again, we talked about some of the 7200 ones. If we look on the inside there, we can see, if we get that light just right there, we can see that the memory bay right there built into the side. Now, there is one memory bay, and I know this is one of 2 key areas that people have got a bit of a bother with this device when it was first announced. Now, the memory on this is expandable up to a maximum 6 gig. As mentioned, you install an official Synology module of 4 gigabytes. This is a 2666 megahertz module of DDR4. You install that inside, and the 2 gig by default can then go up to 6 gig. Now, the CPU inside, that J4125, does support up to 8 gig of memory. And there's a lot of contention there about why 6 gig. Is it so Synology didn't ship this device with 4 gig by default? Not great if that was true. Secondly, the idea that you have only got that 1 bay accessible there, even though deconstruction of these devices has shown that that other bay is just underneath that metal panel. You have to disassemble the whole thing, but there is another memory panel just on that board in there. And people have experimented with previous generations exceeding the recommended maximum memory by Synology to mixed results. I'm certainly not endorsing that here, although I have talked about in the past how to do that. I will say that it very much is a choice for you, because you hugely could invalidate your warranty by doing that. But reeling it in a bit, 6 gig is still a strange maximum memory number, not just for a CPU that can support 8 gig, but just generally a 4 and a 2 gig stick. It's a weird inconsistency for me. It doesn't really affect things in a grander scheme of things, but it's still not a great number overall. But apart from that, we can talk about ventilation. Inside, you can see the fan, that rear-mounted fan, is right behind the SATA base with lots of cooling going through the device. We have got those Synology logos there on the side, all completely ventilated, which means that the use is utilized as passive airflow working in conjunction with that fan. And again, the front trays are not completely filling the internal bay there, and you can see that there is plenty of space all the way around that front panel where air can make it through. So that active airflow on the back working with a passive airflow on the front results in a lot of cooling throughout this device, which is great for efficiency, especially on a device that could be on for days, weeks, months, or even years at a time. So the chassis is plastic. It's slightly larger than its predecessor, if we put it there. And if we have a look, I haven't got the predecessor here, but we will be doing a full comparison of this over at the Span YouTube channel in the next week or two. But moreover, if we look at the base of this device, we can see not only more active cooling, but we can see those two NVMe bays. Now these are the game changer. And again, I say game changer, there is arguments to and from, for and against these bays. You simply remove the external casing there, and then inside you can see those two M.2 NVMe PCIe bays. These allow you to install super fast 3000 and above megabytes per second SSD. Again, Seagate 510s, these are the ones that we're going to be installing inside this device, a couple of 240 gig modules. We're going to be putting them inside here, and we're going to be doing performance testing of traditional hard drives in a RAID environment with and without SSD caching. Of course, it's not all perfect. There's a few bumps along the way. First and foremost, you cannot utilize those bays for raw storage. They can only be used for SSD caching. So for those of you that were thinking about installing SSDs inside a device like this, so you can edit photo and video on the fly, you're not going to be able to use these for raw storage, for a volume or a storage pool. You can only use them for caching and assisting an existing hard drive array. The second thing is two drives in conjunction with SSD caching will not give you the same performance that say a 4 or a 5 bay NAS with caching would as well. So you have to factor that in, that when you are utilizing this device with caching enabled, the results you get are reflective of both the hard drives you use, the capacities you have, and the number of drives in the RAID that you're utilizing. Two drives in a RAID 1 with SSD caching will not give you an enormous leap in performance. It's going to be relative to the overall performance of the disks and the RAID you're utilizing. The last point opens the door to another area of contention with most users on the rear of this, because I am genuinely impressed by this device, and I am looking forward to seeing how it fares in Plex, virtualization, and in surveillance. Three things I think this NAS is going to be brilliant for. But if we look at the rear, we can see that lovely rear mounted fan that can be set automatic or manual to lower and heighten the RPM in terms of internal core temperature and noise if you see fit. It's still a very quiet NAS. You've got that red eSATA port at the bottom there for the expansion chassis that we talked about. We've even got a USB 3 port for more supported devices, compatible dongles, UPSs, more USB storage for another tier to your backup strategy, and more. But the two LAN ports, they are the things we need to discuss. These two LAN ports right here. Now, they've got LEDs on them. I know on one of my previous videos, one of you mentioned about, do they still have the lights on the rear? I thought it was a bit of an odd question. I looked into it, and you're right. Sometimes companies use cheap NICs that don't have lights on the rear that can be really annoying during troubleshooting. I'm pleased to say this is not one of those devices, and it does arrive with the little lights there based on either side. If I bring it nice and close for that particular user, maybe you're watching this at home. But the reason I want to focus on the 1GBEs is they're both a blessing and a curse for some of you. Let's put that there so we can keep that while I'm talking. Now, those 1GBE ports allow you to link aggregate, which means that you can have on one port 1 GBE, which is around 100 or so megabytes per second. Two of them link aggregated together using lag or port trunking, or to a lesser degree load balancing, which is when they're used kind of turn-based. You can get up to 200 or so megabytes per second, or 2 gigabytes, which is great. But firstly, a lot of you are unhappy about this device arriving with 1 GBE ports in 2020, because a lot of NAS brands and hardware providers, and we are talking switches, we're talking routers, we're even talking home media devices, are starting to arrive with 2.5 GBE and above, as well as larger gigabit quantities too. And this device arriving with two 1 gig ports was a little underwhelming for some of you, particularly because you might not have a lag enabled setup. But the other thing that was a bit of a disappointment on that score is the idea that because this device has got NVMe SSD caching to support its two SATA bays, you could have got theoretically 1,000 megabytes of performance external on this device. You may well get that internal with the right RAID, the right file formats, and the right SSD and hard drive combination. But it was the idea that with a couple of enterprise hard drives inside there, 7200, 256 megabyte cache, great performing drives, even data center class like some Exos, and then install some high-grade NVMe's in there. And again, like the 510s, they're Gen 3 times 8, I believe. Oh no, what can I say? Rewind, Gen 3 times 4. Pop those inside, and you are potentially going to get speeds that are somewhere between 800 and 1,000 megabytes per second. And being limited to just 200 megs here did put a lot of people's noses out of joint, because as impressed as I am by this NAS and it being a 2-bay with a featured SSD cache, I can't overlook that slight bottleneck in there on the rear, and this is still present on the 920, and it will come up in the 920 hardware review that's being filmed in about 1 day after this. So I do think this is an area where a number of you may have to make a choice between buying one of the Plus series Diskstations or going for something a bit bigger, like some of the 5 and the 8-bay devices, maybe even holding out for the DS1621 XS, which is going to have 2.5 GBE as well as PCIe upgradability. And of course, there's that dual card that Synology have been putting out, the E10 M.2, which is a 10 GBE and SSD cache combination card. Not supported on this device because it doesn't have the M.2 SSD. But the point I'm making is there are lots of NASs out there that either arrive with the capability to have 1,000 megs external output and the performance inside to back it up, or give you the ability to upgrade towards that. All of those NASs are from Synology. It just happens that this one is not one of them. So if that sounds like something you want to get hold of, this might not be the video for you. But pushing forward, let's talk about DSM on this device. Now, this series of device, the 7XX series, if you will, the 2-bay expandable series is actually relatively new. Its first generation was the 716 Plus, and that was released in the closing stages of 2015. And it has always been popular. It's not been quite as popular as the bread and butter, your Reebok Classic, that was the standard 2-bay, in this case the 220, but the expandable powerhouse prosumer kind of a medium business model version has always been popular, and that's why Synology have always gone to greater lengths to make sure the entire spectrum of DSM functions on this NAS. For example, if you are going to utilize this for standard business practice, there are loads of replacement apps that can be used as alternatives to third-party and cloud software that you may already have in your home or office environment. And this allows you to migrate all of your data and your processes and your operations internally, keeping everything in-house. You've got internet access if you want it, but you don't have to use it. And in the case of this device, you have got things like Synology Drive with its great one portal access point of all of your files, not dissimilar to using Dropbox or Google Drive on your web browser, but also with a local client that you can install on your Windows or Mac system and have a pinned folder that's accessible on your file manager, and also have file streaming and file pinning, cloud pinning, that sort of thing, all possible on this device, with Mac support in DSM-7 coming hopefully very, very soon. On top of that, you've got replacements to your day-to-day operation files in your business. So if you're using a calendar application like Outlook, you're using Skype or WhatsApp, you're using tools for, just day-to-day mail operations, calendar, Office 365, Google Docs, all of these third-party apps that probably exist in one or all of those in your home or office environment. There are alternatives to all of those apps within Synology, and they look pretty damn good. Most of them, in some respects, actually surpass that of third-party alternatives. You've got Synology Chat available for mobile, desktop, and via the web browser for all of your users to communicate, send files, collaborate, create projects, shared dashboards with NoteStation, and more. You've got Synology Office to open Office docs, Excel sheets, presentations, any of that kind of stuff, all within the NAS. You've got Synology Mail, so you've got your own mail client that can work web servers, mail servers, and third-party ones. Synology Calendar, you can migrate other calendars, all working with the other apps we've talked about, and making sure that you can enjoy all of your data in a home or business environment as good as possible, but not using the internet, but using your own private cloud. Now, moving away from business, let's talk home. Home users, you've got Photo Station, Video Station, Music Station, all of these allowing you to enjoy your media files anywhere in the home or over the internet on the devices you care about. Synology are one of the few brands that have applications for Amazon Fire Stick, Amazon Alexa, they've got Skill in there as well, and other platforms too. So you don't need to use a third-party app like VLC or Plex Media Server to interact with these Synology applications. They've got it at either end of the funnel, and therefore, once again, keeping your data in-house. If you want to use it as a Plex Media Server, I'm pleased to say we will be doing 1080p and 4K transcoding tests on this device with Plex Media Server, so you will be able to see just how good this is going to be for a Plex server. Now, for Plex, you will of course need a Plex pass to take advantage of hardware transcoding, because this CPU arrives with support of that. But if you don't want to get a Plex pass, but what you get Plex for is not the digital video tuner, or you don't want to use it for web shows or anything like that, I recommend Synology's Video Station app, because it's got a lot of the cool features of Plex, but utilizes native transcoding and will give you better performance of transcoding and playback of 1080p and 4K files. You don't have to use it because it's included for free. Just try it out, give it a go. But there's still a Video Station application, or DS Video, for mobile platforms, client, desktop platforms, and of course Amazon Fire Stick. There are loads of apps available. I haven't even talked about Active Backup, that great one portal backup tool from all different server arrangements, cloud, VM, and physical, all to be managed by one central access point. For surveillance, you've got things with using CCTVs and IP cameras in your home or business environment, and allow you to see them and have triggered alerts in a optimal and business class surveillance platform. It's probably one of the best you can get. And what I'm saying is, this device is a complete package of hardware and software. It's not perfect. There's definitely things they could have done differently. For a start, those 1 GBE ports on the rear are an area of contention for me, and the fact that as much as I love that there's NVMe SSD cache in this device, and I cannot wait to see that performance, I would be lying if I said that I'm not disappointed that we're going to be locked in at 2 GBE maximum. But that one thing aside, and if you don't intend to take advantage of plus gigabit networks any time in the next 3 to 5 years, this is a damn fine purchase, and easily the best 2-bay that Synology have put out in the history of their company. And that is a bold, bold statement, but I will back it up in the software videos featuring Plex multimedia transcoding, Video Station transcoding, VM support, surveillance, and a software overview in the next few days. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. It's run a little bit long, and I'm trying to make these videos a little bit more approachable to people out there that this is their first NAS and no prior and assumed knowledge whatsoever. But we'll find out soon. Do check out my software overview of this NAS coming very, very soon. And otherwise, click like if you've enjoyed this, click subscribe to learn more, and I'll see you next time.